Years had passed since the death of Smaug, since the battle of the five armies had bathed the slopes of Erebor in blood and fire, and peace once more rested upon the lonely mountain. King Dane Ironfoot ruled with wisdom and strength, the forges roared with life, and the songs of the dwarves echoed proudly through the golden halls where once only silence and ash had dwelt. Trade flourished with Dale, and the lands to the south and west grew rich again, but though gold filled their coffers and laughter filled their homes, a faint unease began to creep into the hearts of men, elves, and dwarves alike. For beyond the northern wastes, where the world fell into shadow and ice, something ancient had begun to stir, a whisper that had not been heard since the world was young. In his cozy hobbit hole at Bag End, Bilbo Baggins had grown old, content, and a little restless. He spent his days writing tales of dragons and dwarves, and his nights were troubled by dreams he could neither explain nor forget, dreams of fire bursting from the earth, of a black crown ringed in flame, and of a voice whispering his name through endless darkness. He tried to dismiss it as fancy, but every time he looked upon the ring hidden deep in his chest, a cold wind seemed to pass through the room. Meanwhile, far away in the misty mountains, Gandalf the Grey wandered alone beneath the stars, feeling the pulse of an ancient power returning to the world, a vibration in the very bones of the earth, as though something long asleep had begun to awaken. He traveled first to Erebor, where Dane and Balin welcomed him with joy, yet the celebration quickly turned to worry when the wizard spoke of dark omens, strange lights flickering above the withered heath, beasts wandering from the north with eyes like molten stone, and whispers carried on the wind that spoke of the burning crown. Gandalf stood before the council of dwarves, his staff glowing faintly in the dim light of the throne hall, and said in a voice that trembled with warning, "A shadow rises from the farthest north, not Sauron reborn, but a power that even he once feared. A servant of the deep fire, bound before the first age, now stirs again to claim what was lost, the crown of flames." The hall fell silent. Even the strongest warriors of Erebor shuddered at the name. For in the oldest songs, sung by dwarves before memory itself, there were tales of the 7 crowns of power forged by the lost Maya of the Underearth, beings of both creation and ruin. One crown had been hidden beneath the mountains of the north, its fire sealed away by ancient enchantments, until the coming of dragons had buried it beneath centuries of flame and ruin. Now that seal was breaking. Gandalf knew that the fate of all Middle-earth hung in the balance, and so he summoned an alliance greater than any since the War of the Ring had begun. He called upon Legolas, swift and keen-eyed, and Tauriel, whose heart still burned with the fire of her people's lost honor. He sent word to Bard the Bowman, now Lord of Dale, who brought his warriors and the courage of men. And finally, he visited the Shire once more, where Bilbo, though weary and content, found himself unable to refuse the call of adventure that tugged again at his heart. "I told myself I'd never leave this hole again," Bilbo grumbled, packing his small leather bag. Gandalf smiled knowingly. "And yet, my dear hobbit, the world rarely keeps its promises." Their company, soon to be known as the Fellowship of the Crown, gathered at Rivendell under Elrond's guidance. There, the ancient lord revealed a map unlike any other, not of lands and mountains, but of the invisible veins of magic that pulsed beneath the surface of the world, flowing like rivers toward one dark place, the grey wastes beyond Angmar, where the crown of flames lay buried. "If this crown awakens," Elrond said gravely, "it will not be dominion that the enemy seeks, but rebirth, a cleansing of the world in fire." Bilbo shivered at the words, yet deep inside, some stubborn spark of courage stirred within him. And so they rode forth at dawn, their path winding through ruined fortresses, snow-laden passes, and forests whose roots whispered secrets from before the dawn of men. Strange signs followed them, birds flying backward, rivers glowing under the moon, and shadows that moved though nothing cast them. The deeper they journeyed, the colder and quieter the world became, until even their voices seemed swallowed by the silence of ancient death. One night, as they camped among the shattered stones of old Angmar, a cold fog crept upon them. The fire dimmed to embers, and the stars vanished behind a veil of grey. Then from the mist emerged a figure, tall and thin, wrapped in tattered robes black as soot. Its face was hidden, but its eyes burned like dying coals. "You seek the crown of flames," it hissed, its voice scraping like iron across stone. "Turn back, children of light, for he waits beneath the ash, dreaming of fire. When he wakes, the world will burn anew." Bard drew his sword, Legolas raised his bow, and Gandalf's staff burst into light. Yet before they could strike, the figure's body melted into smoke and vanished, leaving behind only the echo of its laughter. None spoke for a long time. When dawn finally came, pale and weak, Gandalf stood upon a ridge and gazed northward, where the mountains looked like jagged teeth biting into the clouds. "That was no ghost," he murmured, his voice heavy with foreboding. "That was a herald, the first sign that the old fire stirs again." Bilbo clutched Sting tighter, staring at the endless expanse ahead. "Well," he said softly, "it seems adventure has found me again, and I'm too old to run from it this time." And with that, the Fellowship pressed on into the frozen wilds, toward the land where even dragons had feared to tread, toward the awakening of a darkness older than the sun, a power of flame and shadow waiting to claim Middle-earth once more. The Fellowship of the Crown pressed northward beyond the ruins of Angmar, into lands where the light of day seldom reached and the very air seemed heavy with forgotten sorcery. The sky grew dimmer with each mile, and the stars above faded behind a veil of black mist. It was said that no living thing had walked these paths since the fall of the Witch King, yet now the earth trembled faintly beneath their feet, as though something vast and buried stirred below. Bilbo rode beside Gandalf, his cloak wrapped tightly around him, his heart pounding like a drum. The landscape stretched endlessly, twisted trees like skeletal hands clawing at the heavens, rivers of ice flowing through canyons carved by ancient fire, and mountains that glowed faintly red beneath their snow, as if their hearts still burned. On the fourth night, they reached the Valley of the Veins, a place where the ground itself shimmered faintly, marked by glowing fissures that pulsed like the veins of a living creature. "The magic of the world bleeds here," Gandalf whispered, kneeling beside one of the cracks, his staff glowing softly in answer. "These are the wounds of the earth where creation and destruction meet." The air buzzed with energy, and even the elves could feel the hum beneath their skin. But as they made camp, strange whispers began to rise with the wind. Shapes flickered at the edge of the firelight, faint silhouettes moving in silence. Legolas drew his bow, and Toriel whispered, "They're watching us." Bilbo turned, his small hand trembling around the hilt of Sting, which faintly glowed blue. "Orcs," he stammered. Gandalf shook his head. "No, something older." As the moon climbed high, the shadows grew bolder. From the darkness emerged creatures, neither living nor dead, spirits of the ancient fire, bound to the will of the crown itself. Their bodies were smoke and flame, their eyes hollow, their voices like the roaring of distant furnaces. "Leave this place," they moaned, circling the camp. "The crown belongs to the flame unending." Gandalf raised his staff, and a burst of white fire scattered the apparitions like sparks in a storm. "Begone!" he thundered. The air exploded with light, and for a moment the valley was still again. Yet even after the shadows vanished, the fire refused to burn bright, and the company felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. Bilbo barely slept that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the silhouette of a figure standing amid fire, a crown hovering above its head, dripping molten light. When dawn came, they pressed onward into the Shadowlands proper, a realm of ash and smoke where even magic faltered. The very ground seemed to breathe beneath their boots. Bard and the men of Dale struggled to light torches, for the air itself resisted flame. "It's as if the land hates us," Bard muttered. Legolas nodded grimly. "It remembers those who tried to destroy it." By midday they reached a plain of black glass that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The surface reflected not their bodies, but their fears. Gandalf saw the White Council burning, Legolas saw Mirkwood turn to ash, and Bilbo saw the Shire swallowed by darkness. "Do not look down," Gandalf warned softly, "for the glass shows what might be, not what is." Yet the whispers from the surface followed them, calling their names, promising peace, power, or glory until even the bravest hearts wavered. By nightfall, they reached the obsidian gate, a colossal archway of dark stone carved with symbols that pulsed like living flame. No wind blew there, no sound stirred. "Beyond this lies the Forge of Souls," Gandalf said quietly, "where the crown of flames was first born." He placed his hand upon the runes, murmuring ancient words of the valor, and the gate trembled before slowly opening with a low, rumbling groan. A wave of heat and darkness swept over them, and they stepped through into a cavern vast as the night sky. Rivers of molten fire flowed between bridges of stone, pillars rose like mountains, and at the heart of it all stood a throne of blackened iron, upon which no one sat, yet the air around it pulsed like a heartbeat. Then they heard it, a sound like a distant drum, steady and slow, echoing through the cavern. "He is waking," Toriel whispered, her voice barely audible. The very walls seemed to breathe, and from the shadows behind the throne, two burning eyes flickered open. A voice, deep and ancient as the world itself, filled the chamber. "So the thieves return, seeking the fire they once feared." The ground quaked, and a figure began to rise, vast, cloaked in shadow and flame, its body half-formed, its face hidden behind a mask of molten gold. The crown of flames hovered above its head, spinning slowly, bleeding streams of light that melted the very stone beneath it. Gandalf raised his staff, shouting words of power in tongues forgotten by men, and the chamber erupted in light. "You will not take this world again," he roared. The creature laughed, a terrible sound that shook the mountain. "This world was never yours to give." Fire burst from the throne, sweeping across the cavern. Bard and Balin shielded Bilbo as shards of stone fell from above. Legolas' arrows burst into flame mid-flight, and Toriel's blades glowed white-hot as she struck at the creature's shadow, but every blow passed through it like smoke. Gandalf stood firm, his staff shining brighter and brighter until it cracked with the strain. "Run!" he shouted to the others. "Get Bilbo to the crown now." As chaos raged, Bilbo stumbled forward, clutching Sting and shielding his eyes from the blinding light. The crown hovered just ahead, pulsing with fire and darkness, its power humming in the air like thunder. He could feel it calling to him, promising safety, strength, and peace. His mind screamed to resist, but his heart burned with a strange, ancient pull. "Bilbo!" Gandalf cried out. "Don't touch it!" But before he could stop himself, the hobbit's fingers brushed the edge of the molten light, and in that instant, his vision exploded. He saw fire raining from the sky, mountains crumbling, oceans boiling, and beneath it all, a shadow vast and endless whispering his name, Ring-bearer, Flame-bearer, Child of the Void. Then everything went black. When Bilbo awoke, the cavern was silent. The crown was gone. Gandalf knelt beside him, his robes scorched, his staff dim. The others stood behind, battered and pale. "It has begun," Gandalf said softly, staring into the burning cracks spreading across the floor. "The crown has chosen, and now the world will tremble once more." The earth trembled as the Fellowship fled the Forge of Souls, the black sky above torn by streaks of red fire. Bilbo clung to Gandalf's arm, his head pounding with visions of endless flame. The crown of flames had vanished, but its voice still echoed in his mind, whispering in tongues he could not understand, calling him to return, to finish what had begun. Behind them, the mountains groaned as if alive, their peaks splitting open to reveal rivers of molten light. "He has awakened," Gandalf said grimly as they stumbled into the frozen plains beyond the gate. "The Flame King rises once more." Far beneath the earth, the being of shadow and fire, once a servant of the valor, twisted by time and rage, was reforming. The crown had chosen a new vessel, and through Bilbo's touch, the spark had found its way into the living world. The dwarves retreated to Erebor to prepare for siege, while Bard gathered his armies in Dale. Legolas and Tauriel rode to warn the Elvenking, and Gandalf remained with Bilbo, who now struggled against the growing fire inside him. "I can feel it," Bilbo confessed one night as they camped near the river Carnan, his voice trembling. "It's like something burning behind my heart, calling me to let go." Gandalf's eyes softened. "Do not let it take root, my dear Hobbit. The smallest light can defy the deepest shadow, remember that." But the fire did not rest. Each day, Bilbo's dreams grew darker. He saw the Shire aflame, his friends turned to ash, and himself standing amid the ruins, wearing a crown of living fire. When he woke, tears filled his eyes, and Gandalf knew the battle would soon come, not against armies or beasts, but against the will of the crown itself. Deep in the night, the ground split open, and from the crack rose a figure cloaked in flame, towering and terrible. Its voice boomed like thunder across the valley. "The Hobbit bears my fire. Give him to me, and I shall spare your world." Gandalf stood firm, planting his staff in the ground. "You will have nothing, creature of ruin." The being laughed, a sound that made the stars flicker. "Then burn with him." The valley erupted in fire. Gandalf unleashed his full power, his staff blazing white, clashing against the red inferno. Bard's arrows rained from the cliffs, Legolas' blades flashed, and Tauriel's cry echoed through the chaos. But none could stop the rising storm. As the mountain cracked and fire poured forth, Bilbo stepped forward, his small form dwarfed by the godlike blaze. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice breaking but clear. The Flame King's fiery eyes turned toward him. "You carry my heart, halfling. Surrender it, and you shall live forever." Bilbo looked down at his trembling hands, then at Gandalf, who shook his head slowly. "It's not yours to give," the wizard said softly. And in that moment, Bilbo understood. Power was never meant to be owned, it was meant to be resisted. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and placed his hand over his heart. The fire surged, filling him with unbearable light, but he did not scream. Instead, he whispered, "I am not your vessel." The crown's voice shrieked in rage, and the light exploded outward, blinding and pure. The ground split, the firestorm roared, and then, silence. When the smoke cleared, the Flame King was gone. The mountain had fallen quiet. Gandalf stood alone beside a scorched patch of earth where Bilbo had once stood, his staff glowing faintly. "He gave it back to the world," the wizard murmured, tears shining in his eyes. Weeks later, when peace returned to Middle-earth, the story spread of a small hobbit who faced the oldest fire and triumphed not by strength, but by heart. Erebor's forges burned brighter than ever, Dale was rebuilt stronger, and the elves sang a new song of hope. Gandalf returned to the Shire one last time and placed a single white stone upon Bilbo's garden, whispering, "The smallest of hearts can carry the greatest of flames." True strength is not found in power, Gold or glory, it lies in courage, humility, and the will to resist temptation. Even the smallest soul can stand against the darkest fire, and sometimes, the bravest act of all, is to let go.